Welcome to the special edition of EU Coming Together, CNBC Europe's program about European Union issues. I'm Raymond Frenken, coming to you from the European Parliament in Strasbourg, where we had a discussion, an interview with Frits Bolkestein, the member of the European Commission responsible for Europe's single market, which has been credited as one of the success stories, one of the few success stories in the European Union. Now, 4 years ago, European leaders actually agreed to make Europe the most competitive economy by 2010. But in the last year, it has become clear that those attempts are faltering. And I started the interview by asking Commissioner Bolkestein exactly what's going wrong.
Well, we've made progress, but not sufficiently. We've made progress, for example, in the area of financial services, where we have this action plan consisting of 42 measures. We've almost completed that. We have also done various other things, such as the community patent, very important. Also rules on public procurement, since 16% of the total European economy consists of public procurement. And we have done various other things, all to the good. But indeed, we have not done enough, and not quickly enough. Over the past 10 years, our experience is that it takes 8 years from start to finish to have a new law in operation. And that, of course, is far too long. It's unacceptable. And indeed, as you quite rightly say, of late, we seem to be sliding back. For example, investment in the European Union has decreased over the last few years. Also, internal trade between the various member states has gone down slightly, but still. And also price convergence is not as good as it used to be. So there are definite problems, and we're not happy. I'm not happy with the way things are going. If you should ask me what is the cause, in my view, the cause is firstly that member state governments, not so much parliament, but governments, are insufficiently aware of the need to perform, to get structural improvements to their economy. And secondly, that where they do agree that something ought to be done, they're laggard. They act far too slowly to really get things going.
So what do you think needs to be done to improve the situation? European governments, obviously, at loggerheads, also party politics seem to be playing a role at a European level. Are you still confident that that situation can be straightened out?
Yes, I am confident it can be straightened out. After all, in the 80s, in the 70s and 80s, the European economies grew at a faster rate than the United States. The US is now again on a path of economic growth, in Europe also, but the Americans are doing this much faster, much better than we are at the moment. On the other hand, if you look at fundamentals in Europe, one sees there a market of 450 million consumers and potential investors coming into being. Inflation has not quite disappeared, but almost. Therefore, the makings are there for a much more important part in world economic affairs than at present is the case. But once again, in order for Europe to realize that potential, member state governments must first of all convince themselves to do the right thing, and secondly, if they have convinced themselves, they must do that, and pretty smartly too.
So if you're very right to point out that there is a huge potential with enlargement, 450, nearly 500 million people, 5% of world GDP, yet European businesses are not investing. Instead, over the last decade, they've invested probably more money in the United States. What can you do to keep that money here?
It's a matter of convincing potential investors to invest in Europe, but the role of member states themselves is, of course, cardinal. After all, a European Commission can do its bits and can lead in the debate, but member state governments must pick that up and do what needs to be done. And in some large member states, that is not precisely what is happening, and unfortunately so.
This month, the Commission actually published the 6 monthly statistics on the internal market, how countries are doing in terms of implementing the European directives. If we look at these countries, Denmark, UK, Spain and Finland are doing very well. Yeah. Very interesting to see 2 non-Euro countries in there. But among the biggest culprits, France, Germany, Greece, Italy very much so. Yeah. What do you think the governments should do? Or do you think these governments are not taking Europe serious?
I think they are. But I think that the political processes in these countries are such that it remains very difficult to convince parliaments and to convince trade unions to do the right thing. The Scandinavians are always very good. And if one looks at the tables about competitiveness of the various European member states, the Scandinavians always come out top of the list. Finland, for example, is outstanding. Ireland is performing extremely well of late. In fact, barring the UK, which is a large member state, obviously, it is basically the small member states that are performing well. And perhaps that says something about politics in large member states, in particular those that, as it were, remain mired in the old consensual politics that worked so well in the 60s and 70s, but has, as it were, run out of steam.
So do you think
this is, if you'll pardon me, this is what some economists call the Rhineland way of conducting an economy, which once again was very successful also in my own country, in Holland, over the 50s and 60s and 70s. But it's run into the sand, and if we want to make progress along the lines that you and I both want, then member states should move towards a more Anglo-Saxon way of running their economy.
But it would be very difficult to convince Germany and France to adopt that Anglo-Saxon way, and at the same time, is it a lack of political will in these countries, or is it the system that simply is not able to deal with this European situation?
It is I think it consists of various components. First of all, there are governments or large parts of the body politics of those member states where there's not really a conviction that that is the way to go. Some member states may do it willy-nilly, but hesitantly, and not really wanting to make progress in that area. So there's an element of conviction. Are they persuaded or are they not persuaded? Secondly, there is the political constituencies in member states. For example, in a country like France, which has a very well-performing economy, if you look at the private parts of the economic of the sector in that country, but it has very large public trade unions in the public part of the economy, which I think remain to be convinced of, for example, the need to have pension funds. After all, we are facing a demographic crisis with the aging of the populations. And those countries that do not act adequately will come a cropper in 10 or 15 years. So there is the element of conviction, as I said, persuasion. The second element is the constitution of the body politics. And then thirdly, there's the what I just now described is the Rhineland way of consensual politics, which is run into the sand. We have to change that.
The Rhineland way had been described also as the third way. President Clinton had, your previous Prime Minister Wim Kok, he was heralded as an ambassador of the third way. But it seems that in the early part of the current century that model is faltering. What do you think France and Germany should learn from this? What should they do to improve their situation? Well, maybe not demanding them to go to the Anglo-Saxon system.
Well, I'm not saying that they should go all the way towards what people then call an American way of running the economy. And I myself would not like that. Certainly there are aspects of the American way of doing things which I would not find congenial. But we can move halfway to a sort of mid-Atlantic model. And first of all, once again, it's a matter of realizing what we're up against.